Hi, my name is Mike Gibb, and I run accountsrecovery.net, and I'll be moderating today's webinar on the biggest mistakes that collection agencies tend to make. You know, I coach my kids in soccer and hockey, and one of my many sayings is, we never lose. We either win or we learn. And I guess today is intended to be a discussion about how collection agencies can learn from one another to help their businesses grow and succeed. We're fortunate to have a panel of experts with us today who will share their stories and insights with us. This webinar is being generously sponsored by Interpros. You'll get the chance to hear from them a little later in our program. I want to take a quick second and say a few words about accountsrecovery.net. Accountsrecovery.net is a news and information platform for the ARM industry. The site publishes unique and curated content, maintains a number of email newsletters, hosts webinars like this one, and offers a number of exciting podcasts for the ARM industry. The site is free for anyone in the industry to use, and it's a great resource of news and insights to help educate and inform. I hope we all spend a few minutes every day checking out what it has to offer. Let me tell you a little bit now about today's speakers. LaDonna Bowling is the Vice President of Special Operations at Contract Callers, Inc. in Augusta, Georgia, responsible for training development and client relations. She has decades of experience in first and third-party collections, focusing on utilities, telecom, and medical. She's very active with the Georgia Collectors Association, a member of Inside Arms Compliance Professionals Forum, and is a certified instructor for ACA International. She also holds the Credit and Collection Compliance Officer designation, as well as the International Fellowship of Certified Collection Executives designation. LaDonna is the 2016 recipient of the ACA International's Kurt Swirsky Award for Outstanding Leader in the Credit and Collection Industry. She believes it's her mission to educate the public on the importance of the collection industry, and has stated numerous times that the collection industry is one of the most underappreciated industries in the nation. Mike Hiller is the Vice President of Collections for American Profit Recovery. He joined APR more than a decade ago as an entry-level employee. He is a licensed collection manager in Michigan and serves as a subject matter expert for the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. Mike Frost is the Chief Compliance Sales Officer and General Counsel for CBE Companies in Cedar Falls, Iowa. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Northern Iowa and a Juris Doctorate from Drake University Law School. Frost joined CBE Companies in 2004 and manages various teams of professionals, including sales, marketing, legal, quality assurance, regulatory compliance, legislative affairs, litigation defense, corporate governance, and enterprise risk. He also changes all the stuff in the vending machine, too. Mike is an active ACA member and has chaired several committees. He is currently serving his fourth year and second term as a member of ACA International's Board of Directors. Mike received ACA Members Attorney Program Designation Award in 2014. He has also earned ACA's Fellow and Scholar designations, was named Unit Leader of the Year in 2013, as President of the Iowa Collectors Association, and received a Judicial Advocacy Award in 2018. Michael O'Mara has been a professional in the collections industry since 1990 and has held virtually every job the industry offers. Michael's been active in ACA and Washington Collectors Association, and is the past president of the WCA and his local bar association. He has achieved several designations offered through ACA, including the 3CO and IFCCE, and obtaining his Scholar and Fellow degrees through ACA. He is the recent recipient of the Kirshner Instructor Achievement Award. Michael has been active in several ACA committees and is committed to the protection and growth of the industry and our association. The format for today's webinar will be a panel discussion. We encourage everybody to submit questions, and we'll get to them when the discussion has concluded. To submit a question, please enter it into the question tab on your Zoom webinar control panel. This event is being recorded, and a recording will be made available in the coming days on accountsrecovery.net. Finally, this event is an audio-only event. If you're not seeing anything on your screen, you're not missing anything. So with that, I want to launch into today's discussion. So we've segmented our discussion into a number of different areas where our panelists seem to see collection agencies make the most common mistakes, or most frequently make mistakes. And the first topic we're going to talk about are collection letters. So with that, LaDonna, maybe you can walk us through what are some of the common mistakes you see being made by collection agencies when sending letters.
Well, thank you, Mike. And I'd like to say I'm happy to be here with all these mics. But I think that one of the biggest mistakes is not following the regulatory requirements for the wording of the letters. There's 5 things that we have to put on the validation notice, and one of those is telling the consumer how to dispute the debt. There have been some lawsuits where agencies have changed the wording around, I guess, to make it sound more friendly, and that's gotten them into trouble on the legal side. Not knowing what all the requirements are from the state level, because there are several states who have very specific requirements as to what goes on their letters, and you have to follow them to a T. I think those are the biggest mistakes.
Yeah, this is Mike Hiller, Donna. You're absolutely right. I mean, what we've been seeing is, the old standbys of agency name instead of the DBA, right? So register a DBA, use a DBA, especially if you want your name viewable in that window. Otherwise, just put your return address. Consumer account number, that's been a mainstay for the past year or so. It's easier for mail returns and those types of things, but our letter vendors have a lot of creative ways of sorting mail now, so it's not such a concern. But don't put an account number on there. Lots of lawsuits out of the second. And I see 809, 809A 3 through 5 as the next big thing, and that's our initial communications. We thought it was safe harbor because the FDCPA outlines it fairly clearly. What they outline clearly, however, is a bunch of contradictory lines. So for us, instead of putting notify us, we're putting notify us in writing, which is consistent with the rest of the language in 809A. Instead of putting if you request, well, how is it requested? What venue? We're putting, put receive your written communication. So a little more clear and a lot more consistent.
Yeah.
And this is Michael O'Mara. I might just add that we've seen a pretty significant uptick in agencies getting sued over how they're identifying the original creditor as well. So make sure you understand who the original creditor is, especially if you're in the medical field. If you've got a doctor and a clinic and a hospital, you need to make sure you identify those folks. Whoever the original creditor is, don't abbreviate. Make sure that it is crystal clear. A lot of agencies have problems with a field length where they can only put in so much in a given field to identify the creditor. That can cause problems if there is abbreviations and the like there. So make sure you take a look at how you're identifying your creditors.
Yeah, and especially if you're doing work for some debt buyers where you have current creditors, original creditors, all that can get a little bit daunting when trying to figure out what to put on your letters.
Yeah, this is Frosty. I guess I would echo kind of what the presenters are saying so far, and just add that, I do a lot of collection letter reviews from a MAP perspective, member attorney program at ACA. And while it may not be required under insurance anymore, there's still a lot of agencies that continue to have, members review those letters to ensure that they're in compliance with the most up-to-date regulations and up-to-date case law that's out there. And I would just say, by looking at a lot of them, a lot of times what I see are things that people are throwing into the letters that just don't need to be there. So kind of like what you said about making sure that you're getting the right information, but also don't put too much in. You don't need a logo from another trade association in your letter. What's that going to do? Does it benefit you in any way? Does it tell the consumer anything? Probably not. You probably shouldn't have it there because it just calls into question what is it. And it's not customarily something that you would traditionally put in a collection letter. I see a lot of that. I see a lot of issues related to links that may be in your collection letter to drive people to payment portals. You have to go to those payment portals and ensure that those payment portals are compliant with the FDCPA. If they're not, you're subjecting your entire payment portal to a letter review. Kind of simple things like that. And I think LaDonna made the point that people are trying to be kind, which is very good. I mean, that's what the agency wants to drive to, is we want to be respectful and to consumers, and we're trying to do the right thing. And we're now getting called out for that in court. Keep them basic, keep them directed at the disclosures that are required, as I think Mike Hiller pointed out. Stay to the letter of the law, get the letters out, and hopefully it generates a contact. If nothing else, it generates adherence to the specific regulation and nothing more. But they are a cesspool of opportunities for plaintiffs' counsel to try to file class action suits, and that's the one thing everybody's trying to avoid today from a cost perspective.
Well, Frosty, you started out on the at the beginning talking about what you do, as far as letter reviews. Even though the insurance requirement is not there anymore, there are some states that require that you have your letters reviewed by an attorney. And I think it's just a good business practice regardless, because, laws are always changing. And despite how much we try to stay on top of compliance and laws and such, we might miss something because, I can't interpret things the way an attorney would. So I would rather, someone who is well versed in that field review our letters to make sure that they are correct and follow, to the letter of the law. Because I know that there was a lawsuit where I think it was Rodriguez versus Northland Group. One part of it was they had added to their letters, "We look forward to hearing from you." And even though they weren't found at fault for that, but they still had to, pay for the defense of that statement. So I think attorney review is critical.
I would agree, but I would add one thing to that. I've seen the industry over the 20 years I've been in it go from agencies absolutely not willing to share a single thing with a competitor to agencies being very open and sharing a lot of information with competitors. Sometimes it's not bad to not only bounce single letter issues off of attorneys and have them do the reviews, but it's also good to bounce them off somebody that you trust in the industry. If there's another agency that practices either in your marketplace or in a different one, and you're willing to share those letters or get insight on what they're doing, I think it's good to collaborate in those areas too, to say, how are you guys complying with this issue, or how are you dealing with this in your letter? And sometimes you'll even get agencies to share letters across each other so you can see what's working, what's not, and how best to serve your customers. So I think that's been a trend that we've seen in the industry, is a lot more openness. And I would recommend that to all the listeners as well. If you can find somebody that you trust in the industry that may be a competitor, that you can share some information and get some from them, it's always a good thing to do as well.
Yeah, I think that's sound advice because, I do a lot of letter jobs as well. And it constantly amazes me how many of my clients will say, well, I think our letters are pretty much bulletproof, and I'll go in and review them. And not only are there problems with the letters from a legal perspective, but there are simply typos, sentences that are not well constructed. So I think the more eyes you get on these letters, the better, because you need somebody who didn't write the letter, who doesn't look at the letter every day, to come in from a fresh perspective and make sure it says what you intended it to say. Because a lot of times, I think Mike Ross will agree, it's very rare that you get a bunch of letters from a client and you don't find a couple of letters that don't have problems with them. I don't think I've ever done a letter job where I don't think I've improved markedly the letters in some way, or alleviated or found a potential problem.
Yeah, one mistake we made in the past, and I was trying, I guess, to save on having to create, another letter. We had on our letters, because we credit report for some of our clients, it said, this account may be reported to a credit bureau. And when I had them reviewed by an attorney, they were like, well, this is just too ambiguous. Either it's going to report or it's not. And I hadn't looked at it from that perspective, but I thought, I was covering all bases with the phrase of this account may be reported.
I'm curious, Michael O'Meara, you raised an issue in your remarks when you were talking about sort of limits on, field length and how many characters you can put in a field as it relates to sort of taking that information, including in a collection letter. If you've got a situation where you've got more characters in the field than you've got room for, how do you advise agencies deal with that?
Well, we can put men on the moon is what I tell my clients. So we can certainly figure out some way to do this, either through your letter vendor, if you use one, or through your software folks at home. But if you've got, for instance, Dr. Sana Yama at the, Bethesda Clinic, and you abbreviate that Dr. Satan, you're going to have a problem. And I've seen cases and more, an increasing volume of cases where they are arguing that and alleging in a lawsuit that you have confused the least sophisticated consumer by failing to adequately identify the original creditor by name. An abbreviation won't do it. So that's a technical problem that you just have to kind of work through, but you can do it. I've had several clients initially tell me it can't be done. And, with IT, as everyone knows, it can't be done until you need to do it. And then, of course, anything can be done.
And this is Frosty. I would just agree. Add one thing to that is I've seen a lot of letter reviews, especially in the medical field, where you have potentially 5, 10, 15 different prospective creditors because of the way that the hospital systems are set up. And I've seen agencies actually put in like maybe the client that has the largest balance amount, but then wants to couple all of those accounts together, and puts a client bar at the top to identify the client. But then when you put in that, you can't put 15 clients in there, right? Because it doesn't have enough space, to Michael's point. So what I've seen is people put in ABC Hospital and various others, and then they try to break it out at the bottom. So I think you got to be very cautious on how you approach that issue. And if you don't have enough variables to put all of those client names in it, maybe it's removing that client box at the top, and maybe it's identified in a breakout at the bottom. There's different ways to skin that cat, but you have to look at it in totality to understand. You can't put it in various others because it doesn't identify fully who the client is, and it could be 15. The other way to do that is to send out individual letters so there's less confusion. But obviously, when you're trying to save expense, that's not something you want to do, especially if those are all rolled up and merged into one debtor account for your system. So that's another example of an issue that you would look at from a collection letter perspective and figure out how do you work through some of those field restriction issues.
Yeah, and speaking of abbreviating fields, I've also seen agencies where they are abbreviating the fields related to the amounts owing. For instance, instead of saying principal balance or just principal, they will abbreviate it as Prince, which is okay. I think even the least sophisticated consumer can figure out what Prince is, but they would go down and all of a sudden you're seeing a C/CST, which of course we in the industry could probably look at and say, oh, that's probably court costs. But again, what is the least sophisticated consumer going to take that to mean? They probably don't know. So be careful about your headers on your letters to make sure that you're not, that there's no way that anybody could be confused about what this term means. If you're saying court costs, then say court costs. Don't abbreviate it into some kind of strange anagram or whatever those are called, CIA.
So let me ask you, attorneys, this. How do you feel about QBR codes on letters, where the consumer scans it and it goes direct to a link or a payment site? How do you feel about those?
Can they view it from the outside of the letter? Yes. Yeah, that's a problem. Because if somebody has access to that information, then you're potentially, that's the old Douglas line of cases. But if you can access it internally in the letter, not externally from the letter through the envelope window or anything like that, as long as that link, whatever site they go to, is FDCPA compliant, which is kind of a point I made earlier on the collection letter review, those are probably okay. The problem is if you have somebody that has capability to scan that information and can get to it without opening the letter, if it's not addressed to them, or if it is addressed to them as the wrong person, then it's a third-party disclosure type issue.
Yeah, and it depends on what that Q reader is gonna show whoever is looking at it. I don't know if anybody's ever downloaded the app onto their phone, the Q reader phone, but the early iterations of these letters with these codes would tell you everything you needed to know about the consumer. It would tell you the consumer's balance and sometimes even who the money was owed to. Nowadays, letter vendors are much more circumspect in the information they put there just to make it easier for them to do mail returns. But you've got to be very careful about what's going to show up there. And I agree with Mike that it's potentially problematic, and if you can avoid it, you should.
Good. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, at this point, I just want to pause our discussion briefly, and I'd like to invite Aaron Reiter from Interpros to say a few words. Aaron?
Thanks, Mike, and thanks to all the panelists today, LaDonna and all the other Michaels. Interpros is actually really excited to sponsor this webinar topic because we work so hard to protect our customers from exposure related to their software and their hardware, whether it be auditing, certifications, or automated processes, including the templates that that actually touch the letters that you guys are really focused on. As panels are discussing today, there are many opportunities to standardize process or consumer-facing language that protects businesses from legal actions. And the more opportunities to leverage modern database structures and build compliant templates into software or remove human interactions from repeatable actions entirely, the better, in our opinion. At Interpros, we consider ourselves a service company that happens to make world-class software platform for debt recovery. So long-term relationships and mutually aligned goals are what make us successful. And as new industry requirements or insights come to light, our customers receive updates and upgrades to the platform to keep pace, usually on a monthly basis. Interpros is entirely devoted to supporting the debt recovery market. It's all we do, and we're really great at it. So for all of our customers who are attending this call, thank you again for your business. And if you're looking to modernize, to leverage new technologies as they arise, or looking for a better relationship with your software provider to feel supported, give us a call or check us out at interpros.com. It's interpros.com. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Aaron, and thanks to Interpros for your continuing efforts to support the education and betterment of the ARM industry. I know we're all a little better off today because of it. Thank you. Moving on to our next topic, wanted to spend a few minutes talking about disputes. Mike Hiller, maybe you can talk about some of the best ways for collection agencies to manage dispute investigations, communications, and the overall handling of disputes.
Yeah, so thanks, Blake. I mean, as far as the dispute investigation, review it with your eyes open. I mean, seriously, something meaningful, not just rubber stamp. More than likely, you're going to be okay. But when you do nothing, I mean, that's when it's pretty obvious in my approximation. So for the letters, disputes, the re-disputes, right, the endless barrage of repeated disputes, things like that. I mean, as far as communications, so your collectors are on the phones, the mistake, back to your title here, the mistakes, is not using and improving scripts. I mean, that's a huge mistake. You know, you should be able to develop scripts that can be used on most every call. What we say is they should be adhered to plus or minus 90% of the time. I mean, there's going to be some ad lib, but it's not 15, 20 years ago when it's show me the phone and I'll show you what I can do. And if you can think fast on your feet, then you're going to be successful. I mean, you know, how are you compliant without some type of systematic progression of that call? So the other thing I'll add with regards to communication is, you know, when your clients come to you and ask for, you know, what you say to consumers on the phone, what the heck do you give them? You know, if you don't have scripts. And I can tell you that we've had several clients now who are scooping up these rats from a sinking ship that is the CFPB, but scooping up CFPB officers, and that's the first thing they're asking for. I mean, they're asking for things like scripts. It is still the CFPB, right? They didn't spend $9 million to change it to the BCFP.
No, actually, I think they're gonna keep it at the CFPB. Actually,
yeah, they're not going to spend the $9 million. Okay, so the CFPB, but in any event, you know, these officers are leaving the CFPB, and they're getting scooped up by some larger organizations, and they're heading up compliance departments, and they're expecting you'd be able to provide these things. The other thing with regards to communications specifically, and it's kind of a dead horse situation, but another mistake is not recording all your calls. I mean, there's still shops out there that don't record calls or don't record every call. I think it's a huge mistake. With regards to disputes and communications, regardless of how the communications are coming at you, phone calls or letters, I think this is an area where we can be proactive. You know, unlike the letters, you know, where a lot of it's reactive, right? You got a year's worth of letters out there, and then there's something that comes out of New Jersey or New York, and now you got a year's worth sitting out there. I think the communications more directly, and the disputes that are dispute communications, you could be proactive. So be proactive where you can, and you know, really your audience here has got to determine for themselves, you know, in what areas, you know, they can improve on. But as Polonius said, brevity is the soul of wit. So I'll leave it there.
I think it comes down to training, ensuring that your staff know the differences and the requirements for